Welcome back to Green Dolphin Science. We're doing another deep dive today.
That's right.
And we're heading somewhere pretty remote, somewhere you might think is untouched. Antarctica.
Yeah, stunningly beautiful, but maybe not as pristine as we imagine. We've been looking into a study with some, well, surprising findings.
Definitely surprising. And you, our listener, you appreciate getting right to the core of things, those aha moments, right? No getting bogged down.
Exactly. The big picture, clear and concise.
So we've waded through this scientific paper. It's all about microplastics and Antarctic krill to pull out the really key stuff for you.
So our mission today really is to get a handle on how much microplastic pollution has actually, gotten into these Antarctic krill.
And krill are so important down there.
Yeah.
Euphausia superba, right? The cornerstone species.
Absolutely fundamental. We need to understand where the plastics are in the krill, what they are, and I guess what it all means for Antarctica.
Okay, so let's dive in. This study, it's pretty groundbreaking, isn't it? The first one really looking specifically at microplastics in krill.
As far as we know, yes. First focused look at Euphausia superba. And, people might wonder, why krill? Why these tiny little shrimp things?
Well, they're basically lunch for half of Antarctica.
Pretty much. Penguins, seals, even massive whales.
Yeah.
They all rely heavily on krill.
So if something affects the krill.
It's going to ripple right up the food chain. Big time.
Okay, so how did the scientists even go about finding these tiny plastics? Where do they start?
Well, they went on an expedition between March and October 2021, collected quite a lot of krill, 437 samples altogether.
Wow.
From two main areas. Around the South Shetland Islands, that was the bulk of them, 355 samples, and then another 82 from the South Orkney Islands.
That sounds cold. And how do you catch that many tiny krill?
They used a mechanized trawler, but the crucial part really was what they did straight after. They meticulously wash every single krill with pure water.
To get rid of anything just stuck to the outside.
Exactly, to make sure they were only looking at plastic the krill had actually eaten, ingested.
Smart. Okay, avoids contamination.
Yeah.
So then, back in the lab, finding microscopic plastic in a tiny creature sounds tricky.
Oh, it's detailed work. Very careful. First, they dissected the krill, took off the exoskeletons, the shells.
Okay.
Then to isolate any plastics inside the tissues, the muscles, the digestive tract, all that soft stuff, they used something called alkali digestion.
Alkali digestion. Sounds intense.
It's basically using a chemical, potassium hydroxide, under controlled heat for about 40 hours to dissolve away all the biological material.
So it gently dissolves the krill itself.
Leaving behind anything that isn't biological. Like plastics.
Wow. Okay, like dissolving away the haystack to find the needle?
Mm-hmm.
What then? How do you see these tiny bits?
So after digestion, they filtered the remaining liquid through extremely fine filters, glass fiber filters. These trap the particles.
Right.
Then under a powerful microscope, a zoom stereo microscope, they could actually see them. Count them, measure them, note the shape, the color.
Okay, so visual inspection. But how did they know what plastic it was?
For that, they used another technique. Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy, FTIR.
FTIR. Okay, break that down for us.
Think of it like shining a special kind of infrared light onto the particle. Different plastic types absorb that light differently, creating a unique fingerprint, a spectrum.
Like a chemical signature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By analyzing that spectrum, they can identify the specific polymer, the type of plastic.
Clever stuff. Okay, so after all that meticulous work, what was the bottom line? How much plastic did they find?
Well, the average number per krill across all samples, it ranged from 0.10 to 0.67 items.
So less than one piece per krill, on average.
On average, yes. Broken down by region, it was about 0.29 items per krill in the South Shetlands and 0.20 in the South Orkneys.
Which might not sound like a huge amount compared to, say, fish in polluted harbors.
Right. Compared to some hotspots, the numbers are lower. But, and this is the really important bit, they found microplastics in krill from every single place they sampled.
Every single site. Okay, let that sink in. Even in the Antarctic, these tiny bits of our waste are everywhere.
It really drives home how widespread this stuff is.
Did they see any pattern? Like, did bigger krill have more plastic?
No, interestingly, they looked for a link between the krill's size, or weight, and the amount of plastic inside, but didn't find any clear correlation.
So it's not just the older, bigger ones accumulating it over time. Any krill seems vulnerable.
Seems that way, yes.
What about the plastics themselves? Size? Shape?
Mostly tiny. Really tiny. Over 90% were smaller than 150 micrometers.
Which is minuscule, hard to even picture.
It really is. And the dominant shape.
Fibers.
Fibers, like from clothes.
That's certainly a strong possibility. Fibers made up 77% in the South Shetland samples, and even more, 87% in the South Orkneys. Fragments were the next most common shape, but fibers were definitely number one.
Okay, fibers and colors. Did anything stand out?
Black, blue, and red were the most common overall. Black was the top color in both areas.
But there was a slight difference. Blue and red were more common in the South Shetlands, whereas in the South Orkneys, after black, the next most common was actually transparent.
Huh. A regional difference in color? Could that mean different sources, maybe?
It's possible. Makes you wonder, yeah. Different local inputs versus what's just drifting in.
So shapes, colors, but the big question, what were they made of? What kind of plastic?
They identified 7 different polymer types in total. The big 3 were polyethylene, that was 37%.
Like plastic bags, bottles.
Yep. Then polypropylene, that was 22%. Thick containers, ropes, and polyester, 21%.
Polyester, clothes, textiles again.
Exactly. And again, a bit of a regional difference. They found all 7 types in the South Shetland samples, but in the South Orkneys, they only detected 4 types, and polyethylene was really dominant there, like 67%.
Wow. So the same plastics we use every day, polyethylene, polypropylene, polyester. They're ending up inside krill thousands of miles away.
Precisely. And identifying these types gives clues about the journey.
Right. How so?
Well, polyethylene and polypropylene, they float, they travel huge distances on ocean currents, so some likely comes from, way further north, lower latitudes.
Carried down there over months or years?
Probably. But for the South Shetlands, which see more activity research stations, fishing, a bit of tourism, there might also be more significant local sources contributing. Waste generated right there.
And the fibers. Does the polyester finding back up the clothing idea?
It strongly suggests it, yes. The high number of fibers plus identifying polyester points pretty clearly towards synthetic textiles. Laundry wastewater.
Every time we wash our fleece jackets.
Tiny fibers break off, go down the drain into the water system, eventually the ocean, and, well, apparently all the way to Antarctica and into krill. It's quite a thought.
It really is. Okay, so we have a picture of what they're finding. But why are the krill eating this stuff? Do they think it's food?
That's one of the main theories. Maybe the tiny particles, especially the colors, look like phytoplankton, their natural food.
Mistaken identity.
Could be. Or it might just be non-selective. Krill filter huge amounts of water to feed, right? So if the plastic's just there in the water...
They just swallow it along with everything else.
Exactly. Or maybe the plastic sticks to their actual food and they ingest it accidentally that way. Still figuring that out.
Okay, so a few possibilities. As you said, this is the first big study like this on krill. What's the main message you take away from it?
For me, the biggest thing is just the confirmation. It proves really clearly that plastic pollution hasn't spared even this incredibly remote ecosystem. It's in the food web right at the base.
Right, it's not out there anymore, it's in there.
Exactly. But it also, opens up a ton of other questions. What are the effects on the krill themselves? On the animals that eat them? Long term?
So a vital first step, but lots more research needed. Where do we need to look next?
Definitely need to pin down the pathways better. How much is coming from far away versus local sources? Are some areas worse than others? And critically, we need toxicology studies.
What does this plastic do to the krill?
Yeah. Does it affect their feeding, their growth? Can they reproduce properly? Are there toxic chemicals leaching out? We just don't know the health impacts yet.
So bringing it back to you, our listener. Why does plastic in tiny Antarctic krill matter to someone living, thousands of miles away?
Because it shows how connected everything is. Our plastic problem, our global problem, reaches everywhere. Even the places we think of as pristine, isolated. It's a real wake-up call about the reach of our impact.
And here's something really interesting to think about. You mentioned the levels found right now are lower than some other places.
For now, yeah.
But this study gives us the first baseline, the starting point. We didn't have this data for Antarctic krill before.
Absolutely crucial baseline data. We need to keep monitoring this now. Track if those levels change, go up, hopefully not, but maybe they will. It's the only way to understand the real risk long-term for that whole Antarctic system.
Which leads to a pretty big question for you to chew on. Antarctica is about as far away and isolated as you can get on this planet.
It really is.
So what does finding our plastic inside its krill tell us about how far this pollution travels and how long it sticks around in the oceans?
It's quite sobering, isn't it? That everyday stuff, bags, bottles, clothes fibers, ends up deep inside the Antarctic food web in a place that seems a world away.
Definitely sobering. If you want to explore this further, maybe look into studies on how ocean currents transport microplastics over vast distances. That's fascinating in itself.
And also research on what happens when other animals eat plastic-contaminated prey, like those penguins and seals eating the krill. What does it mean for them? Understanding that bigger picture really highlights why these findings in krill, even though they seem small and remote, are actually really significant.